we're talking to Janie Stephens here, and she's from Bible Study Fellowship, and she's going to talk about this exile and return. So what are the books that we're going to be studying?
Yes, so there are 8 books included in next year's study. We will be studying a portion of the book of Ezekiel. That's where we will start off. We then dive into the book of Daniel, Ezra, Esther, Haggai, Zechariah, Nehemiah, and Malachi. So it's the exilic and post-exilic historical and prophetic books of the Bible, all nearing the end of the Old Testament.
Is there a central theme to this?
Yes, the central theme is a time to build. And so obviously we're in the reconstruction and rebuilding portion of Israel's history as they're returning home to Jerusalem to rebuild. And we kind of throughout our study materials try to weave that theme throughout because that can apply in a variety of ways in our own lives that the Lord is always I mean he's a builder and he can take what has crumbled and rebuild it into something that will glorify him and bring about good for his people. And so yes, a time to build is kind of a central theme that we weave throughout.
I think everybody that's listening right now needs to hear this and needs to study this because somewhere in our lives we're like we got to rebuild this. We
Mhm.
got to start standing out for God, right? We have to start to stand in our place, and we already went through Revelation where the persecution comes. Now we're ready to start rebuilding our spiritual life with God and start to really use the gifts that He has given us through studying His Word, right? So many of us, we want to be courageous. We want to be like Daniel. We want to be like Esther, but the culture around us feels very overwhelming. So how can this help somebody develop boldness to stand firm in their faith?
Yes. So, well, yeah, you mentioned Daniel and Esther. Those are great examples because that is exactly what they do. We can learn a lot from them about engaging culture. Um, and I think there are maybe a couple things. There's probably more than that, but a couple things come to mind. We can very much learn from them how to properly engage culture, even if and when culture opposes biblical truth, which, as you just mentioned, our culture today does. The culture of Babylon and Persia did too in the days of Daniel and Esther. And but still, it's very interesting to just observe how they went about engaging their culture and engaging the people of their culture in ways they did it in ways that exemplified grace and wisdom, respect for others. They had a clarity of conviction, but it wasn't necessarily this us versus them kind of culture war way. They did it very much in humility. They
Mhm.
had courage and boldness to speak at the proper time. They didn't retreat out of fear, but they also didn't lash out in like shouting arguments either. And so I think that's one thing that we can definitely learn from them, just how to properly and respectfully engage and have a dialogue with someone who might disagree with us. Secondly, and I think this is tied to the point that I just made, a major theme of both the books of Daniel and Esther is the sovereignty of God. And Esther is particularly interesting because God is actually not mentioned at all throughout the book. But the point is that just like in real life, in our lives today, the providence of God is working in and through just the ordinary events and details of our lives, the ordinary interactions and conversations, who you bump into at the grocery store, all the little things that seem somewhat meaningless and random. God is mysteriously and invisibly in some way working in and through those scenarios. And he's in fact in control of those scenarios on some level. And he's also in control of the grand sweeping arc of history. And that's more the message of the book of Daniel. But either way, in both scenarios, I think Daniel and Esther were both able to courageously engage their culture with humility and grace because they wholeheartedly believed that God was ultimately in control. It wasn't ultimately up to them to change anything. I mean, he is in control. He will do it. All they had to do was be faithful in obedience and love for God. And so I think we would do well also to remember, I mean, we're not in control. It's actually not up to us to change the culture. We must simply be faithful. And I do realize that's easier said than done. There are plenty of gray areas, and figuring out when to speak up and when not to speak up takes discernment. But
Mhm.
God is trustworthy to guide us, and He is ultimately in control. And so those were a few things that I think we can take away with us from especially Daniel and Esther.
There's a great, beautiful theme of restoration throughout the books. For someone watching who's experienced personal brokenness or loss, what can they learn about God's faithfulness in rebuilding their life?
Yes. So when I think about the idea of personal loss, two figures from this study immediately come to mind, Daniel again and Ezekiel. So both Ezekiel and Daniel, they were contemporaries of one another. Both were displaced, exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon, and they lived the majority of their lives there in a foreign land. And I mean, Ezekiel, especially, so the book of Ezekiel opens by cluing us in to the current state of Ezekiel's life. He's just turned 30 years old. He was born and raised among Israel's priestly tribe. His priestly duties are supposed to begin at age 30. And I mean, he is trained and prepared his entire life to assume this role of priest at the age of 30. And yet now here he is, 30, yet not serving in the temple in Jerusalem, but instead sitting among the exiles by the Kabar River in Babylon, verse 1 tells us. And so, in other words, I mean, you can imagine all of his hopes, dreams, aspirations crushed. He must have felt sidelined, shelved out of this career that he had planned his entire life for. He now has no plan B, no hope for the future. And yet, that's exactly when and where the Lord called and commissioned Ezekiel and gave him this grand vision and an assignment to be his prophet, to speak to his exiled people in Babylon. And then Daniel's life and circumstances were, in a way, very similar. I mean, Daniel, he came from a prominent Jewish family. He was so gifted and brilliant. I mean, as a young person, he could have anticipated an outstanding future for himself in Jerusalem. And yet, in the prime of his life, I mean, he's taken captive by the Babylonian army and dragged away to live the rest of his life in captivity in a foreign land. And I mean, as far as we can tell, Daniel never married, he had no nearby family members. And yet, because of his relationship with and dependence on the Lord, and also because of his sheer giftedness that was also from the Lord, Daniel rose to the office of prime minister in Babylon. He served with great effectiveness in Babylon for 66 years. And he was used by God to not only provide us an example to live by today, as we just talked about, but also God used Daniel to reveal parts of his pattern for the future of history. And so, I mean, in both of these instances, Ezekiel and Daniel, we learn that God's plans and purposes and promises, they can be trusted over and above our own hopes and dreams and aspirations for our lives. I mean, his plans are ultimately always bigger, bolder, grander than we could ever think and imagine. Sometimes it is a matter of time, and then sometimes it is a matter of whether it's on this side of eternity or the next. So I'm not necessarily saying it's easy, but I am saying that the Lord is trustworthy. And so I appreciate both of those examples from Ezekiel and Daniel's lives.
Yes. So engaged in God. Their whole life is God is in control of me, and I'm gonna go with the flow, which is so hard for a lot of us out there, right? A lot of
Yes.
us don't want to go with the flow. Some of us want to, fight God, but but we know that God is always in control. So if you're just joining us, we're talking with Janie Stephens from Bible Study Fellowship, and she's talking about exile and return. That's the next study for 2025 and 2026, and it's going to help build your faith in the middle of a hardship. So, what might God be asking you, the viewer, to rebuild in your life right now with Him at the center of it? And so often we feel unequipped to make a difference in today's world. So Jenny, how does this study show us that God can use ordinary people like Ezra or Nehemiah for extraordinary kingdom purposes?
hmm Uh, yeah, Esther and Nehemiah are excellent examples, actually. I mean, specifically Nehemiah. Okay, so you see this great work that Nehemiah has been called to that plays a very specific and significant role in the greater purposes of God. And yet, at the same time, throughout the book of Nehemiah, we see Nehemiah deals with all the same, day-to-day, mundane, menial frustrations, tasks, relational problems that we deal with as well. Even at the end of the book, we see Nehemiah, we see this in Ezra too. The work was completed, there was a big celebration, but then the moment that Nehemiah and Ezra stepped away from the work, I mean, almost immediately, the people again fell into sin. And
Hmm.
both of these books end on somewhat of kind of a discouraging note in some way. I mean, to Nehemiah and Ezra, it could have felt like, in one fell swoop, all of their work was undone, kind of this sense of futility. Uh,
Hmm.
and I mean, in Nehemiah, the final line of the book, he just kind of muddles out this one sentence prayer of "Remember me, God," kind of like, at least I tried.
Hmm.
And I say that, I actually mean for that to be somewhat of an encouragement. I don't know if it sounds like it, but I say that because it can be easy for us to look back at all these Bible characters and think, oh wow, I wish I had the clarity of purpose, a meaningful, fulfilling work of the Lord before me, like all of these people did. Uh, but what I'm actually trying to highlight is in the moment, all of these Bible characters that we look at and study, they were dealing with the same issues and questions and frustrations and uncertainties that we deal with. We just now have the luxury and advantage of hindsight as we study their lives, but they didn't have that. I mean, their work too at times would have still seemed ordinary and frustrating, but we know, looking back, we know that their work was fulfilling the extraordinary purposes of God. And frankly, our work today is doing the exact same thing. We may not yet be able to fully see it, but God is using our day-to-day work today for his eternal purposes, whether you work in ministry or whether you work in any other industry, business, medicine, law, architecture, what have you. God is doing something in and through your work. And won't it be amazing when one day we finally see all that he has been doing in the world throughout history and the role that our lives and work played in his grander purposes. And so that's just kind of one idea that comes to my mind of that he is working extraordinary plans and purposes in the ordinary everyday events of our daily lives.
I like that bigger picture thought. We have to remember that who we serve,
Mhm.
right? Throughout this whole study, we're going to have to remember who we are serving because we see who they are serving.
Yes.
So now, what encouragement would you give to a person watching who feels like their spiritual foundation has crumbled and they don't even know where to start?
Yes, it may very well be true that your spiritual foundation is crumbling, but God Himself, He is not fragile. He will not crumble under the weight of your doubts, discouragements, and disillusions, and He can handle it. And in fact, sometimes, perhaps even oftentimes, it actually might be God Himself who is leading you into and through this particular season of spiritual deconstruction or disillusionment, whatever you want to call it, he sometimes leads us into these seasons on purpose to purposely deconstruct some of those false ideas and or wrong assumptions or wrong beliefs that we've just come to believe over the course of our lives about who he is or who we are and how he works in the world. Sometimes he does need to demolish some of those false ideas and wrong beliefs so that he can then reconstruct and or rebuild up our faith rooted and built up in the truth of who he is, not rooted in some illusion of who he is. And so for those who do presently feel that their spiritual foundations are crumbling, I would say, I mean, actually, that's exactly what the Lord had to do with his people, Israel. And I'm not saying that a person who's going through this is necessarily going through this because of any sin that they committed or anything like that. I'm just saying that I think almost any believer in Jesus Christ almost has to go through something like this. I mean, look at Jesus himself. The path to glory is through suffering.
Mhm.
And so, for those who are presently walking through this, A, know that you are not alone. Um, B, know that this is not a surprise to God. He is with you, He is before you, behind you. I mean, just like Israel, just like the exile did not mean that God was done with Israel. Your season of doubt and or crumbling spiritual foundations does not mean that God is done with you. He is the God who rebuilds, who redeems, who restores, and he is doing something in your life. You can trust him. And so that means, I guess, also continue running back to the Lord at every opportunity. I mean, I guess I've said that before. I guess I'll say it again. I mean, find your hope and stay in Him. He is the only sure source of security, even when everything else in your life is crumbling. And I actually walked through a season like that myself when I did feel like my spiritual foundations were crumbling. It was when I just recently come on staff with the Bible Study Fellowship. I had just moved to a new city where I really didn't know anyone. I was single. I had just left behind my entire community. And about 6 months into my new job with BSF, my mom, who was the person who led me to Christ, she was the person who introduced me to BSF. I mean, she was my best friend. She very unexpectedly, at the age of 60, went home to be with Jesus. She died of a very rare form of heart disease that no one detected. And that really did send me into kind of a several year period of grief and doubt and questioning God. Also, at the same time, there were a few really close relationships in my life that just all of a sudden kind of fell apart. And so it really was in some way kind of like everything in my life was crumbling before me. And I didn't really know what to do with it. Looking back though, I can genuinely say that the Lord, A, he was faithful, and B, he was for sure using that time to kind of help reframe and reconstruct some of the maybe wrong beliefs that I had begun to believe about him. I do think he kind of used that time to um kind of remove a certain amount of maybe pride that I had in my life. I think I'd kind of come to believe that the Lord owed me a good life because I had dedicated my life to serving him in ministry. I had been faithful, all these things. And um, yeah, I've kind of felt a little shocked that how could this happen? But all along, I mean, he was teaching me. He's like, no, this is not a transactional relationship. He is not beholden to me in any way. Um, he does not owe me anything, and so I began to. He definitely was reframing some of those false assumptions and just wrong ways of thinking through that, but always he was also remaining faithful and gently leading me, guiding me, teaching me along the way. And so So in a way, I'm grateful for what he taught me in that season. It by no means is easy or enjoyable. And so for the person who is currently walking through that, um I can relate to you in some way. And I just want to say the Lord is faithful and he is with you and he's doing something. It's not meaningless.
I love those words of encouragement. Thank you. It just makes us think about how we need to stay faithful and obedient to the Lord, even through hard times, hard times. And I'm sorry about your mom,
Yeah,
but I'm sure she's singing up there in the clouds with Jesus. That's for sure. We know
that's
that.
true. Yes.
So, Jenny, where can the viewers go and to learn more and get more involved in BSF?
Yes, our website would be a good first go-to. That's www.bsfinternational.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. At Facebook at Bible Study Fellowship, Instagram at We Are BSF. Yeah, those are probably the best places to go.
Wonderful. And just so everybody knows, I like to say this every year, they have a wonderful children's ministry. They learn all about Jesus and they sing and it's so amazing. We have the greatest here in New Jersey. We have the greatest I'm sorry. I'm very biased. We have the great children's ministry here. So and they call it kids program now. So it's wonderful. And you learn so much more about God, and they do too. It's such a great thing. Well, Jenny, this is the end of the interview. What would you like to leave my audience with today?
A reminder of that God is faithful. I mean, life will throw all sorts of things at us, but in the midst of it, he is trustworthy, he is faithful, and um, as we continue turning back to him, he will prove faithful throughout. And so yeah, that's really the main thing I think that we see in this upcoming study of BSF and just in my own life. I feel like that has been the thing that I keep coming back to over and over again because he is the only sure thing in life. And so I think just the trustworthiness and faithfulness of our God.
What if your toughest seasons where you felt displaced, overlooked, or discouraged are actually the times that God is preparing you to build something greater with Him? Don't forget to like and subscribe and share for more Christ-centered conversations. Visit thecallwithNancySabato.com. Until next time, all glory and honor to King Jesus.